My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment, because something has been waiting beneath the silence, and tonight that silence is beginning to break. What you are about to hear was not created to frighten your heart, but to reveal the hidden emotion inside this sacred fictional story. The person your soul still remembers is carrying a regret so deep that they can no longer disguise it as distance. They have tried to continue their days as though nothing happened, but every ordinary moment has begun leading them back to you. Stay here, because the reason for their pain is not what you think, and the first truth is only the doorway. They are not suffering because they suddenly discovered your value. That would be too simple. Somewhere inside them, they always knew what you meant. Their regret comes from knowing that there was a moment when they could have told you everything, yet fear persuaded them to say almost nothing. They remember where they were. They remember the light in the room, the sound around them, and the exact expression on your face. They remember you waiting for one honest sentence. And they remember choosing silence when their heart was pleading with them to speak. Do not look away now, because silence has consequences that pride never understands until it is too late. At first, they told themselves there would be another conversation, another evening, another chance to explain. They believed time would remain obedient. They thought you would somehow continue standing at the same emotional doorway while they gathered the courage to approach it. But time did not wait. You began changing. You began learning how to carry the questions they refused to answer. And now they are realizing that the version of you who waited so patiently may no longer exist. Something happened recently that made this realization impossible for them to ignore. It was not a dramatic announcement. No one gathered them into a room. There was no warning written across the sky. It was something small, an object, a familiar phrase, a memory awakened by a sound they had not heard in a long time. For several seconds, everything around them seemed to disappear. The walls were still there, people continued moving, and the world carried on, but they were no longer present inside it. Their mind had returned to the moment they almost told you the truth. They saw your eyes again in their memory. Not the way you looked when you were happy, but the way you looked when you were trying to understand what they would not say. You were not asking for perfection. You were not demanding a promise they could not keep. You simply wanted honesty. One clear sentence could have changed the direction of both your lives, and they knew that even then. Yet they swallowed the words. They gave you an incomplete explanation, walked away, and spent every day afterward pretending that the missing sentence did not matter. But it mattered. It became the invisible thread running through every connection they attempted to build after you. It appeared in quiet car rides, unfinished conversations, and nights when sleep would not come easily. It followed them into rooms where they smiled for other people. It stood beside them whenever someone asked if they had ever truly loved anyone. They learned how to redirect the question, how to laugh at the right moment, and how to appear untroubled. But the heart keeps records that the mouth cannot erase, and your name remained written across the page they never allowed anyone to read. Stay with me, because the first major truth is approaching. Their regret is not merely that they failed to say, "I loved you." What they withheld was more specific, more personal, and far more powerful. They had already made a choice concerning you. Long before the distance, long before the confusion, and long before you began wondering whether the connection had been real, they had chosen you privately. They imagined a future containing your voice, your laughter, and the strange little habits they pretended not to notice. They saw you beside them in places they had not yet visited. They simply never told you. There was even a night when they attempted to put this choice into words. They opened a blank message and typed your name. Then they wrote several lines, deleted them, and began again. Each version felt too vulnerable. Each sentence exposed a part of them they had spent years protecting. Finally, they wrote something simple: I need you to know that I already chose you. Their finger hovered over the button that could have sent the words into your life. But fear asked one question: what if you no longer felt the same? And that single question silenced everything. They saved nothing, or so they believed. Yet the words remained inside them. Every time they saw your name afterward, the unsent confession returned. Every time they considered reaching out, shame reminded them how long they had waited. The delay grew heavier. A message that might once have required courage began feeling as though it required a miracle. They started imagining that you would ask why they had remained silent for so long, and they had no answer that made them look brave. So they chose another day of distance, only to discover that distance was becoming its own answer. My child, understand what this means for you. Their silence was never proof that you were unworthy of love. It was evidence of a battle they had not learned to face. You interpreted their hesitation through the wounds already inside you. You wondered whether you had been too much, too sensitive, too hopeful, or somehow not enough. But their inability to speak did not measure your value. It measured the strength of the walls surrounding their own heart. What they feared was not loving you. What they feared was being fully seen by someone whose opinion mattered more than they could admit. Pause here, because another layer is opening. They did not only imagine a future with you. They began quietly preparing for it. There was something they selected, saved, or set aside because it reminded them of the life they wanted to share with you. It may have appeared insignificant to anyone else, but to them it was a private promise. They pictured the moment they would finally show it to you. They imagined your surprised expression. They even rehearsed what they would say. Yet when the opportunity came, they hid the object and offered you another ordinary conversation instead. That hidden reminder still exists. They have tried more than once to move it, discard it, or place it where it could no longer disturb them. But each attempt ended the same way. Their hand reached for it, their memory opened, and they placed it back. They told themselves they were keeping it because it had practical value, but that was not true. They kept it because it belonged to the future they had once seen with you. It became proof that their feelings were never as uncertain as they allowed you to believe. This is where the story begins to change. Recently, they found that hidden reminder again. Perhaps they were searching for something unrelated. Perhaps they opened a drawer, a box, an old folder, or a forgotten corner of their phone. Whatever the form, it appeared before them unexpectedly. For a moment they froze. Then they touched it as though touching a memory that could still feel them in return. That was when the pain arrived, not as punishment, but as recognition. They realized they had protected the symbol of your future more carefully than they had protected the relationship itself. They sat with that realization longer than they intended. The room grew quiet around them. A question rose from the place where truth had been buried: why did I keep this if I was never going to tell them? They tried to answer with logic. They blamed timing. They blamed circumstances. They blamed the confusion of that season. But every explanation collapsed beneath the same undeniable truth. They were afraid that loving you openly would give you the power to hurt them, so they hurt both of you first by refusing to speak. Do not skip what comes next, because their pain deepened when another memory surfaced. They remembered a day when you gave them one final opening. You may not have called it that. You may have asked a gentle question, lingered a few seconds longer, or looked back before leaving. But your soul was offering them a doorway. They felt it. They knew it. Their heart moved toward you, but their pride kept their body still. You walked away believing they had made their choice. They watched you go knowing they had not revealed the choice already living inside them. That moment has returned to them again and again, but now it carries a new detail. They finally understand what was hidden in your expression. You were not asking them to rescue you. You were giving them permission to be honest. There is a difference, and they see it now. You had already sensed the bond. You did not need grand words or impossible guarantees. You needed confirmation that you had not imagined everything. Instead, they let you leave with uncertainty because uncertainty felt safer to them than vulnerability. Archangel Michael appears within this story not with a sword raised in anger, but with a light placed over the memory they have avoided. His voice enters their inner silence like distant thunder softened by compassion. You cannot heal what you continue to rename. Stop calling fear bad timing. Stop calling love confusion. Stop calling silence protection. Look at what your heart knew. And for the first time, your soulmate does not run from the answer. They allow the truth to stand before them without disguise. The truth is that they knew. They knew their feelings were deeper than attraction. They knew your presence reached places within them that no one else had touched. They knew that losing you would create an absence other people could not easily fill. Most of all, they knew you were waiting for honesty, and still they delayed. This is the regret burning through them now. It is not the regret of someone who failed to recognize love. It is the regret of someone who recognized it clearly and then pretended not to see it. Yet heaven's message in this fictional journey is not that you must remain frozen until they find courage. Your life is not a waiting room. Your heart was created to expand, not to stand guard over someone else's unfinished confession. While they wrestle with what they failed to say, you are being invited to remember what you deserve to hear. You deserve words that do not make you decode silence. You deserve care that does not disappear when vulnerability enters the room. And if this connection is ever to return, it cannot return in its old form. That understanding is beginning to reach them too. They no longer believe that a casual message will be enough. They have drafted ordinary greetings, but each one felt dishonest. How have you been? Seemed too small for the history between you. I was thinking about you, concealed the fact that you had rarely left their mind. I hope you are well, avoided the question they truly wanted to ask. Is there still any place in your heart where my truth could be heard? They deleted every shallow beginning because the moment now demands depth. Stay close, because there is someone else connected to this unfolding. Your soulmate recently spoke to a person who knew more than they expected. The conversation began without your name, but slowly turned toward missed opportunities. Your soulmate tried to remain guarded. Then the other person said something that unsettled them. Sometimes the one you could not forget is the one you were never honest enough to keep. The sentence entered them like a key finding a locked door. They asked how this person could possibly understand, and the answer changed the atmosphere. This person had seen the way your soulmate reacted whenever you were mentioned. They had noticed the sudden silence, the shift in expression, and the way attention sharpened at the sound of your name. They had watched your soulmate pretend indifference while remembering every detail. They did not accuse them. They simply said, "You never stopped loving that person. You only became better at hiding it." Your soulmate attempted to laugh, but emotion rose too quickly. For once, the mask did not return in time. Then came a revelation they were not prepared to hear. This person told them that you had once defended them in a conversation they never knew about. Even after you had been left with questions, you refused to let others reduce them to their worst moment. You did not reveal their private struggles. You did not use their silence as a weapon. You said that perhaps they were afraid, perhaps they were carrying something they did not know how to explain, and perhaps one day they would find the courage to be truthful. When your soulmate heard this, something inside them broke open. They had convinced themselves that you must hate them. That belief had become the excuse protecting them from action. If you hated them, then reaching out would be pointless. If you had forgotten them, then confession would only disturb your peace. If your heart had completely closed, then they could continue carrying the truth privately and call it respect. But learning that you had once protected their dignity removed the excuse. Your compassion illuminated their avoidance, and suddenly their silence felt heavier than before. They asked when you had said those words. The answer placed the conversation near a time when you yourself had been deeply hurt. That was what stunned them most. You had offered understanding while carrying pain they had helped create. They lowered their head because they finally saw the contrast between your courage and theirs. You had been brave enough to protect love even when it disappointed you. They had been too afraid to name love while it was standing directly in front of them. Do not look away now. This is the second major truth: they did not stay silent because there was nothing to say. They stayed silent because saying it would have required them to change their life. Loving you was never a small feeling they could place between convenient moments. It challenged the identity they had built. It asked them to release habits, expectations, and loyalties that no longer matched their heart. It asked them to become honest not only with you, but with everyone around them. And at that time, they were not ready to pay the price of authenticity. There were influences around them, opinions, fears, old promises, and expectations they had carried for years. Some were spoken openly. Others were never said aloud, yet controlled their choices. They worried about disappointing people. They worried about changing plans. They worried that following their heart would make them appear inconsistent. So they tried to fit their love for you inside a life that had no space for it. When it would not fit, they did not question the life. They questioned the love. But real connection does not disappear simply because it is inconvenient. It waits beneath the decisions made against it. It appears in dreams, songs, places, and names. It returns when laughter quiets and the room becomes honest. Your soulmate discovered this slowly. Every path taken away from you created another reminder. They compared without meaning to compare. They listened for your understanding in other voices. They searched for your warmth in unfamiliar eyes. Yet imitation could not replace recognition. One evening, after another conversation that left them feeling strangely empty, they finally admitted something aloud. No one was present to hear it. The words entered a silent room. I should have told them. That sentence was small, but it marked the collapse of a long defense. Until then, regret had lived as a feeling without a name. Once spoken, it became impossible to deny. They repeated it, and the second time their voice changed. I should have told them before they believed they meant nothing to me. But you never meant nothing. You were the person who made them imagine becoming softer without becoming weaker. You made ordinary moments feel worth remembering. They noticed how you cared for people who could offer you nothing in return. They noticed the way you tried to hide your sadness so others would not worry. They saw strength in you before you recognized it in yourself. And when you laughed freely, they experienced a peace they did not know how to request. These were the truths they carried, yet they allowed you to leave believing they had barely noticed you. Pause here, because what they prepared during that earlier season was more than a message. They wrote a letter. Not a few lines typed in haste, but a confession written when the night was quiet enough for their defenses to weaken. In that letter, they described the moment they realized they loved you. They admitted why they sometimes became distant after moments of closeness. They confessed that your presence made the future feel real, and reality frightened them more than fantasy ever had. The letter contained details you never knew they remembered. A phrase you said casually. A color you wore on a day that remained vivid in their mind. A moment when your hand moved close to theirs and neither of you acknowledged the electricity of the silence. They described the way you looked when you were listening, and how it made them want to tell you things they had never told anyone. The page proved that while you were wondering whether they cared, they had been observing you with a tenderness they were too guarded to reveal. They folded the letter. They placed it inside something connected to the hidden object they had saved. They planned to give both to you. For one full day, they carried the confession close to them. They rehearsed the conversation. They imagined beginning badly, stopping, and then trying again. They imagined you reading the letter while they waited. But before the moment arrived, fear created 100 possible endings. In almost every imagined future, they saw rejection. They forgot to imagine the one future in which truth might have set both of you free. So the letter stayed hidden. Years, months, or seasons may have passed within this story, but the letter remained. Its edges changed. The ink rested in darkness. The feelings inside it did not become less true, they became more painful because they were never given a chance to live. And recently, when your soulmate found the object they had saved, the letter appeared with it. They had forgotten exactly what they wrote. With trembling hands, they unfolded the page and met the earlier version of themselves, the one who had known the truth before fear rewrote the story. They began reading. At first, they felt embarrassed by their own vulnerability. Then they reached a sentence that stopped them. It said, "If I ever lose you, it will not be because I did not love you. It will be because I was too afraid to let love change me." The words felt prophetic. Their younger self had described the very future they were now living. They lowered the letter and stared into the distance, realizing they had predicted the loss and still allowed it to happen. "Stay with me," because the next line was even harder for them to face. They had written, "You think I am deciding whether I want you, but the truth is that I am trying to decide whether I am brave enough to become the person who can keep you." This sentence revealed something they had hidden even from themselves. Their hesitation had never been about your worth. It had been about their belief that they would eventually disappoint you. They feared that once you saw every part of them, your love would disappear. They did not understand that love is not strengthened by hiding. It is strengthened by truth. They tried to protect themselves from future abandonment by withholding the honesty that could have created trust. The very strategy they used to prevent loss became the force that caused it. Now they can see the pattern with painful clarity. Every time you moved closer, they retreated. Every time you asked for truth, they offered ambiguity. Every time your heart opened, they tested how long it would remain open without receiving what it needed. My child, you were not foolish for loving them. You were responding to something real beneath their fear. Your intuition sensed what their behavior contradicted. That is why walking away was so difficult. You were not only releasing what happened, you were grieving what almost happened. You could feel the unspoken future hovering near the connection. But a future cannot be built from intuition alone. It needs choices, language, and courage. Their hidden love could not become your home while it remained locked inside them. The message for your heart is not to return to waiting. It is to release the belief that their silence defined you. You are allowed to honor what you felt without allowing uncertainty to control your days. You are allowed to love someone and still require clarity. You are allowed to hope while continuing to move forward. If they approach you again, let them approach the stronger version of you, the one who no longer confuses potential with commitment or emotional intensity with emotional readiness. Archangel Michael's voice rises again within the unfolding story. The door of reunion cannot be opened with the key of old behavior. If they come, they must come carrying truth. If they speak, they must speak without hiding behind hints. If they ask for another chance, they must understand that a chance is not a return to the past. It is an invitation to create what fear once prevented. These words are not only for your soulmate. They are also for you, because your compassion must now walk beside discernment. Your soulmate continued reading the letter until they reached the final page. There, the writing became less controlled. Certain words had been crossed out and rewritten. They had clearly struggled to finish. They described something they had never admitted. Before meeting you, they had made a private promise never to depend deeply on anyone again. An old disappointment had taught them to associate love with loss. Then you arrived and quietly challenged that promise simply by making them feel safe. That is why their behavior seemed contradictory. Part of them moved toward you while another part sounded an alarm. The more meaningful the connection became, the more urgently their defenses tried to end it. They did not understand the conflict. They believed strong love should feel effortless, so when fear appeared, they interpreted fear as a warning against you. Only now do they realize the fear was not telling them you were wrong. It was revealing the place inside them that still needed healing. But the final page held something more. Near the bottom, they had written a plan. It was not elaborate, yet it was unmistakably sincere. They intended to tell you the truth on a particular day. They had chosen a place connected to one of your shared memories. They planned to arrive early, bring the hidden object, hand you the letter, and finally say aloud what they had only allowed the page to carry. They even wrote the opening sentence they hoped to use. Yet that meeting never happened, and you were never told why. For a long time, you may have believed they changed their mind. The truth within this fictional story is more complicated. On the day they planned to speak, something happened that awakened their deepest insecurity. They heard information about you, partial information, stripped of context. It made them believe you had already chosen a different path. Instead of asking you directly, they accepted the interpretation that hurt them most. They called their fear intuition and withdrew without giving you a chance to explain. The information was not entirely false, but it was not the truth they imagined either. Someone had seen you speaking with another person. A conversation had been misunderstood. A gesture had been described without the emotion surrounding it. By the time the story reached your soulmate, it sounded like proof that they had waited too long. Shame entered before reason could speak. They thought, of course they chose someone else. Why would they keep waiting for me? And because that conclusion matched the unworthiness already inside them, they never questioned it. What they did not know was that your conversation that day was partly about them. You were trying to make sense of the distance. You may have been asking for advice, seeking closure, or explaining why your heart could not simply switch off. The person who saw you did not hear those words. Your soulmate received an image without its meaning. And rather than approaching you, they disappeared deeper into themselves. Two people stood on opposite sides of the same misunderstanding, each believing the other had already chosen to leave. Do not skip now, because this is where regret becomes almost unbearable for them. After finding the letter, your soulmate contacted the person who had originally shared that information. They asked for every detail. The conversation was uncomfortable because so much time had passed, but they insisted. Slowly, the old memory was reconstructed. Your soulmate asked, "Did you actually hear what they were saying?" The answer was no. Did they say they were involved with that person? Again, no. Then your soulmate asked the question they had avoided for far too long, "Why did you make it sound certain?" The person answered, "Because you already seemed convinced. I only told you what I saw." Those words shattered the story your soulmate had carried. No one had forced them to walk away. No one had proven you did not care. Fear had taken an incomplete detail and completed it with their worst expectation. They had abandoned the conversation before it ever reached you. They had hidden the letter, buried the future, and allowed you to believe the silence meant rejection. For several minutes, they could not speak. Their mind moved through every point at which they could have asked you one honest question. They could have called that evening. They could have sent the letter anyway. They could have admitted what they heard and allowed you to answer. But they had chosen certainty in pain over the vulnerability of clarification. Now they understand that the future was not taken from them by fate. It was lost inside an assumption they never had the courage to test. This is the third major truth. They regret not telling you that they were coming to choose you openly. They were not merely considering a confession. They had decided to change the direction of their life. They had prepared the words, the place, and the symbol of that choice. When they disappeared, it was not because their feelings had faded. It was because they believed they had arrived one moment too late, and they were too ashamed to let you see how much that realization affected them. Yet another secret remains, and this one changes the meaning of the letter itself. After the painful conversation, your soulmate returned to the final page. Beneath the written plan, there was a folded section they did not immediately notice. The paper had been pressed together for so long that it appeared to be a single layer. When they separated it, they discovered several additional lines. These were not part of the original confession. They had been added later, after the misunderstanding, on the same night they decided not to meet you. The first added line read, "I saw something today, and I think I have lost the right to give you this." The second read, "If I am wrong, my silence may become the greatest mistake of my life." They stopped there. The third line was hidden beneath a stain where the ink had blurred. They moved the page toward the light, trying to understand the faded words. Only fragments could be seen. Your name was there. So was the word, promise. And beneath it, written more clearly than anything else, was a sentence they had never remembered writing: "If the truth ever finds its way back to us, I will no longer run." At that moment, something changed inside them. Regret was no longer only looking backward. It began demanding a decision.